Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk Vietnam. I'm Mai Phương, and on this edition you're going to be meeting Dr. Neal Bermas, and you're also going to be hearing Off the Streets into the Kitchen. Now this is the fundamentals of the decision that Dr. Neal Bermas made when he gave up his six-figure income in New York to move to Vietnam in a small town of Hoi An to start a nonprofit.
Neal Bermas, a management consultant from Manhattan, gave up his six-figure income to move to Hoi An in 2008. Having traveled in Southeast Asia for 10 years, working for large hotel brands and Vietnam, he identified the town as a growing tourist destination. Here, Neal started the Streets International Project with the aim of helping poor disadvantaged children. Until now, over 100 street children have completed his 18-month program, gaining skills in computer literacy, English, and hospitality, before going on to find jobs in local five-star hotels. Neal does everything he can for the disadvantaged children to give something back to the land he loves.
Today we're going to be meeting Dr. Neal Bermas, and we're going to be hearing some of the life transformations that he's helped bring to reality. Hi, Dr. Neal Bermas. How was your flight today?
Compared to the 22-hour flights back to the States, it's barely enough time to buckle up and get on and off the plane.
Who is the one that's going to manage Streets International now that you're in Hanoi?
After a number of years, we have a good management team, both in our restaurant, our training center, and our houses, that I'm quite confident when I go away that they can handle whatever comes up.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about a little bit when you started, with the whole Vietnamese population of staff.
Yes.
Did you face any difficulties at all when you first started?
Well, we like to say we face challenges, but I think evidenced by now, after these number of years of having very competent, as I said, hardworking, a great Vietnamese team, it was worth the additional burden and challenges of starting that way. I can give you an example. We have 3 full-time English teachers because teaching English language is a big part of our program, not because it's my language, but because it really is the language of international tourism.
Right.
And it took us, it would have been very easy to hire expats or foreigners who are native speakers, but again, we didn't think it was really the best thing to do for the community. And so we hired college-educated English majors in Vietnam, Vietnamese, and then trained them for 3 or 4 months in how to pronounce and hear English in the way that we were used to speaking it. But now we have excellent English teachers that all the hotels are eager to hire all the time, but we're glad they stay with us.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So let's go back a little bit. When you first started, how did you start the project right here in Hoi An?
It kind of grew out of my own travels in Southeast Asia and coming across. Certainly we didn't invent the notion of a street kid restaurant. There are many other good places training poor, underprivileged, disadvantaged, vulnerable kids how to work in simple restaurants. But I felt as I visited these places, as I thought a good traveler should do in my own travelers, that they weren't ambitious enough. That there was an opportunity to train and educate young disadvantaged people regardless of their past. To have full-on careers that would give them possibility for self-sufficiency and dignity, and not just a simple job. I didn't think that a simple job was really, yes, it's better than nothing, but I didn't think it was enough. And I wasn't swayed by the notion that a young person, regardless of how difficult their past had been, regardless of how much formal education they had, that there weren't still all kinds of possibilities for their future. And that's been kind of a driving theme of what got us going and in the direction of being so ambitious.
First time I came to Vietnam was over 11 years ago. Of course I knew about poverty and about people being poor, but I never in my life had come across and traveled quite a bit through street kids, really kids living on the streets and begging. And there were a small group of kids, I would say they were 8, 9, and 10 years old. These beautiful dark-eyed kids. They learned enough English because that was the language they needed to know in order to beg. I didn't know then, but I know now for sure that was where the seeds of streets first started from.
So what makes hospitality a good place for a person's career, in your opinion?
Well, I think particularly in so-called developing countries like Vietnam, we know when we study economies that one of the first sectors that takes off in the economy is tourism. So, and this creates kind of a need for human resources, and that creates job possibilities and career possibilities. And one of the responses to that is often to start to import people from other countries, people that have skills or language capabilities. And I thought that that wasn't necessarily the only way. Why not do more in-country training and use in-country resources, in this case, of course, Vietnamese, to take advantage of those economic sectors that are developing, especially tourism and hospitality.
Right. Now let's talk about Streets International. So let's first go into the type of training that Streets International provide for the students.
Okay, sure. We have an 18-month program. During the course of the 18 months, we house the young people. We have a house where the boys live and a house where the girls live. We have a very rigorous training program. As I said, we have English language. All the kids have English language class 6 mornings a week starting at 8 o'clock. Then 3 or 4 afternoons a week they have individual private tutoring sessions, and they have 5 to 6, about 5 hours a week required in the computer language lab. That's the English component.
So a lot of the time is meant for the
quite
English
a bit of
training.
time on English, and one of the things that may not be so obvious that we've learned is that we have to teach at least 5 different forms of English. We have to teach
really?
Irish English and English English and American English,
Right.
and there's
And
as
there's
we know,
Asian English,
and
all
Asian.
types of English.
And actually they sound quite different to the ear. So we use our computer language lab a lot in that regard, so that the young people in our program can start to get at least familiar with and understand the various types of English that they may come across in working in hospitality. So that's the English part, and that is a very, very important part. Then after a short orientation period, all the kids have to decide either they want to train to be professional hospitality people, and in the industry we call that front of the house. That means they learn how to serve, they learn how to bartend, they learn how to do coffee making, they learn about wine and bar and beverage, about banquets, about a la carte, about buffets, and all of those kinds of things. Or they decide they want to be a professional chef and work in the culinary area. And then after a short orientation period, with a little push from us one way or the other, they spend their time in the classroom 2 to 4 times a week studying that. We have a training center with a teaching kitchen and classrooms, as you and I know them, where they're studying the one area or the other. And then they're apprenticing in the restaurant. In the beginning of the 18 months, very little. In the beginning of the 18 months, standing in the back of the restaurant and being a little bit nervous who are all these tall, loud Westerners. But then as the 18 months goes on and their confidence develops and their skill set develops, then doing the actual work that professionals do in the front or the back of a restaurant. So they're apprenticing short shifts during the week, and they have classroom 2 to 4 times a week in those areas. In addition to that, we have a life skills program. Life skills program meets 3 or 4 times a week. 2 times a week is a recreational program. It's ping pong or badminton or running or calisthenics or jumping rope, all the things to help one maintain their physical
fitness,
as we all kind of struggle with.
Right.
And we know how important it is, but we struggle with. And then classrooms and life skills. Everything from human physiology to communicable diseases to personal hygiene to what's a savings account, how to budget, how boys and girls and men and women should respect one another and are equal, what it's like to be in the workplace, job interviewing towards the end of the writing a CV, just the whole myriad of skills that those of us that have been lucky enough to have a family often learn from our mothers, our fathers, our families. And for people who haven't been that fortunate, the possibility for them to learn all those, I think, correctly called life skills.
Hạnh has had an unfortunate life. Her mother died when she was in 10th grade, and she, together with her grandmother, has been struggling to earn a living and escape poverty. So Neal Bermas came to her and offered an opportunity that could change her life forever. Hạnh was one among those chosen to attend the training program at Streets International. That means she has a place to learn, to sleep, and to forge the key that could open the door to her future.
the most important criteria is that they are terribly poor, not just a little bit poor, but terribly poor, disadvantaged, and vulnerable. Most of the kids that come to our program never had 3 meals a day to eat. Most of them never had a safe place to sleep at night to feel secure. This is very, very important in terms of what our objective is in finding kids who are most suitable for our program.
Good morning, teacher.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Hank is among dozens of poor kids that were chosen to join the Streets International Program. During the 18-month program, the kids are taught the highest levels of professional service in culinary arts and hospitality. They can also attend extensive English classes, but most importantly, they can get real experience by working in the Streets Restaurant Cafe. Thanks to those efforts, the lives of these poor kids are turning a new page.
Now, let's talk about the stories that you've encountered during your time at Streets International. What are some of the stories that you remember the most?
There are so many compelling and heartwarming and difficult, we can say, stories. Certainly we have a number of kids in our program who are trafficked. You know, that's sounds too good really for what the experience is. Traffic, as I say to people in other places, doesn't mean that you're caught behind a light with a lot of cars and motor scooters. It means that you're sold.
Right.
It means that as a young girl, a young boy, 8 to 10 years old, that your family, for one reason or another, sells you for all the many terrible, terrible kinds of things that we all know, for the most part, know about already. All of the kids that come into our program, we interview at least twice, and then we either visit the home or the orphanage in many cases, or the street or the village where they came from. And one of the memorable, very difficult times was the very first time I met the father who had sold his young boy when he was 8 or 9 years old.
Right.
And yeah, it was difficult, as I've said several times, so it must have been very, 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 very difficult. I didn't know how I would handle it. I mean, it's unimaginable for most of us to think about how a parent could sell
Their own child.
Their own child. But without going through the whole time I spent with a translator, of course, in meeting this father, I learned a lot. I learned just how difficult and desperate life can be. It's one thing to read about it,
Right.
and it's one thing to drive by it. It's another thing to sit in it and to visit it. And to meet a father, from what I can tell and was told and understand, a hard-working subsistence fisherman who had more kids than he could feed. And to be duped by people who are much smarter than he, to be convinced that his son would have a place where he would eat every day, which he wasn't able to provide on his own, and that he would be taught a trade and given a job, which the father knew he could never do for his son. And to be introduced through a relative, and to meet other kids who said they were already part of what this person was telling the father. Really to be duped in the full sense of the word. I could understand in words and in the look in the father's eyes as he told me the story and as he cried, just how difficult life could be. And this boy now is working as a very well-regarded server at the Intercontinental Hotel in Da Nang. So although these stories really are difficult and make all of us cry and hurt, I think the good thing is the transition that we're talking about and where they go up to. So that's a very, very difficult story, certainly.
Right.
And there are many, many of these stories, almost from all of our kids. When we interview them, you know, it's always a group of us, myself and my colleagues, have to tell you that at various times, we all leave the room with tears in our eyes because these stories, one way or another, just touch us so deeply.
We've learned that one of the main focuses of streets training is to help ethnic people as well.
Yes.
Now, is there a reason why you're helping ethnic people?
Sure.
How do you approach
Sure,
that?
it's a very purposeful reason. You know, in Vietnam, the same as in my country in the States, the same as in Australia, the ethnic minority people, of course, are the most disadvantaged and the poorest. And so, because we're focused on not just poor, but very poor kids, they certainly are part of that in this country. But sadly also, the ethnic minority kids, many of them, are the most vulnerable and in some cases the most trafficked.
Right.
And so a young kid like that is easily trafficked because if they're grabbed,
Right, nobody can track them.
what does the family do? What do they say to the government or the police? They don't have a photo, let alone an identification card or any kind of document. So those kids are, we think, especially vulnerable. And so we decided that spoke to us. We found that very compelling. And so part of our outreach, and each one of our classes now, contains a number of young ethnic minority kids. We have 6 kids from Sapa right now in our program. And we are trying aggressively to open another center in Sapa, because we'd really like to do this. Burgeoning tourism there, lots of possibilities, again, as I spoke about before, in terms of careers and hotels and things. A group of kids that deserve our support. And that's in our planning. And that's kind of why when people listen to me, I don't want them to say, oh, that's really a great guy, he's done wonderful things.
Right.
I want them to say, what? I could be part of that. I could help do more. It doesn't have to be 20 kids, it could be 40 kids, or 60 kids, or 100 kids, or 1,000 kids. Everybody could be a little bit Neal. And I think that's important, is not just to be touched by this, but help be part of it.
Exactly.
One of the main focuses of the streets training program is to help ethnic people in the northern mountainous regions of Vietnam. But it's not easy for potential students to convince their families to let them enroll. In Giang Thị Su's case, both Neil and Sandra had to speak with her family personally to persuade them.
Vì gia đình em rất là khó khăn và bố mẹ em cũng không đồng ý em xuống đây á. Nhưng mà ông bà nói chuyện với bố mẹ xong rồi em nói với ông bà xong thì em xuống đây thôi.
Joining the streets has had a big improvement in Su's life. She had to start working as a tour guide at the age of 13 to help out her parents. But after 9 months of training, Sue has developed basic serving and kitchen skills.
Em thấy em cũng không làm được gì, nhưng mà khi mà em vô nhà hàng làng á, thì em có thể bưng bánh tráng cho khách nè, có thể bưng khăn cho khách và cũng thể làm nước ép trái cây này.
After 18 months on the program, Seung is now equipped with English and hospitality skills through vigorous training classes. She's much more confident in dealing with foreign customers through her work experience in the charity's learning lab, the Streets Restaurant in Hoi An.
Mới đầu vào á thì em cảm thấy sợ, nhưng mà sau những tháng sau á thì em cảm thấy tự tin hơn. Tại vì em nhìn họ cũng giống như là bạn bè hoặc là người nhà của em á. Em không cảm sợ.
Seung graduated from the program in July, along with 14 other trainees from the 4th class. The young men and women who once lived in orphanages in terribly poor villages or on the streets of the cities are now working in 5-star hotels throughout Vietnam.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
The portraits given to Neil and Sandra in the 4th class graduation ceremony are tokens of the students' appreciation and gratitude for the two saviors in their lives.
You have such a diverse group of students, you have
Yes.
such a diverse group of people.
Yes.
How do you design a curriculum that can basically allow everyone to learn in 18 months?
Well, the curriculum is designed from the standpoint of international standards. So our curriculum for culinary hospitality is really the same as if you went to a school in London or Melbourne or New York or anywhere else. And that's how we developed our curriculums. I developed along with my colleagues at the University in New York and one of the top culinary schools there. So culinary is really international standards. And at the end of the 18 months, in conjunction with the Culinary Institute of New York, all of our trainees get a certificate, as if they'd gone to culinary school in New York, one of the best schools there, Institute of Culinary Education. So developing the curriculum from a standard standpoint, from an education standpoint, was not so difficult. The challenge is, how do you then convey that and transfer that skills and educate and train to people who come, as you quite correctly say, come from a multitude of backgrounds and language sets and thinking ability and mathematical ability. And that's a challenge we face every day of the week, all the time. And I think that the way that we address it is a few things.
Right.
One, we have a very, very supportive community, the streets community. We have really heartfelt, wonderful, top-notch, all Vietnamese teachers. Our training is about, our education, our training is about what's the best way each kid is going to learn. It's not just about lecturing or giving examinations. Some kids learn better by doing. Not just kids, you and I and people in the audience. Some of us learn, we read something, we don't know how to do it. Some of us need to practice if we're talking about something in the kitchen, for instance. Some people can learn about knives by reading them. Other people have to handle them and use them. Right? Other people want to see pictures about them. Some people need to have it repeated 3 or 4 times. Some people need to go to a quiet place and study.
Right.
And I think, this is really cutting-edge understanding of education. And we're taking all these kind of the best knowledge about how to educate and using all that we possibly can from those thoughts and those techniques and et cetera, in helping and working with and educating the young people that come to our program.
And have you ever invited anybody from overseas to come over to help the kids? For example, U.S. chefs.
Yes. Yeah, we invite a lot of people from overseas to come over. I'm not a chef by training, my own background, although I know my way around the kitchen pretty well at this point. So our culinary curriculum we developed in concert with a number of chefs in the U.S. at the Institute of Culinary Education in New York. And every 3 or 4 months, we bring another chef, a chef instructor from the U.S. here to spend 2 weeks or a month, sometimes a little bit longer, working with us to kind of review our instructing, to make sure that it's as good as it possibly can be, to work with me on revising our menus perhaps, to get to know the kids and give them a little bit additional tutoring. So we bring quite a few over in that way to help us, particularly on the culinary side of the program.
On the culinary side.
Yes.
I see. Okay, so just before the talk, we did talk a little bit about how some of your students have gone on to open their own chains of restaurants and cafes. So tell us more about those stories.
Yes. Keep in mind that the first class just graduated not so long ago, so I think this is just the beginning of some great stories. But we have one young person who graduated in the first class, and he's now gone to be a partner in his own restaurant in Da Nang, a restaurant for tourists as well as for people living in Da Nang. So we're quite proud of him. There's another fellow in the second class who's in the process of opening kind of a high-end coffee cafe in Hoi. So I think that's just the start of what we anticipate there will be lots of.
I see. And regarding the success of your students, you did say that there's a high percentage of them who ended up working for 5-star hotels and resorts.
Almost all. I mean, almost
all
all are working for the five-star hotels and best restaurants in our area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, there's something that I know that your kids, when they get their first job, they often stay very close to Streets International. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. In fact, we didn't do it in the beginning. Now we're kind of making it a requirement.
I see.
As we reach out and we take kids from all over the country, we're making it a requirement that they agree to stay for at least a year in the Hoi An area. Mm-hmm. For one thing, because there's so many outstanding career possibilities because of the development, but also so that we can continue to be a strong support system. So our staff can kind of be in touch with them, so that if they have a problem with their boss, you know, unlike those of us that have been lucky enough to grow up in a family where our mothers or our fathers went to job, and they would come home at dinner and say, oh, I had a terrible time. Oh, my boss is a pain in the neck. But they still went to work the next day. Mm-hmm. Our kids don't know about that.
I see.
You know, they know about survival. Somebody gives you a terrible time, you go another direction. You don't hang around. Mm-hmm. And so it's very good when they first start out and they have these difficulties, as all of us do in the beginning and maybe some other times as well, with our bosses and with our coworkers and maybe with the policies of employment, that there's a very familiar place that they can go to help them kind of navigate their way through this.
Hồ Ngọc Diệu, a trainee with the 2nd Streets class, grew up in an orphanage center in Hue for 10 years before he joined Streets International. He's now working at a 5-star Anatara Hoi An resort. Diệu said that he had received much more than he expected from the program.
Trước khi mà em vào Street thì em cảm thấy rất là rụt rè với và lại là cái cuộc sống mình không có suy nghĩ nhiều, bởi vì hoàn cảnh cho nên mình chỉ là cố gắng mình tìm một công việc đó thôi. Nhưng mà khi mà đã vào Street thì em cảm thấy học hỏi rất là nhiều, từ không những mà học về chuyên ngành bếp mà còn có thể là học từ những môi trường bên ngoài, như là cũng có người nước ngoài, cho nên xã giao rất là vui.
Besides practical skills, he learned several life skills to better equip himself in a working environment.
Ở Street thì em học được rất là nhiều kỹ năng, như là kỹ năng giao, hay là kỹ năng về phòng cháy, hay là về quản lý thời gian. Thì sau khi học cái đó thì em ra đời em cảm thấy là áp dụng rất là nhiều, không chỉ về cái cách phòng chữa cháy mà mình có thể là truyền cho mọi người xung quanh.
After 2 years at the resort, Diệu has received recognition for his work, and his sincerity and dedication have made customers happy.
Our first student, Mr. Yu, has proved to be very successful, very well liked by the guests, gets many guest good comments. He's fitted in very well to the team. They come out of Streets very disciplined, very well trained.
Diệu has been given the knowledge he needs to start a new life, and the success of the graduates has proved that what Neil and Sandra envisioned is possible.
This is a question that I've wanted to ask. So how do you define success for a student, or a success, does it not need to be defined in this case?
I don't define success for the students. What we want to do is give them the skills and the security and the comfort and the confidence to go out and to be able to develop a career and to define success in whatever way they think is suitable for their lives. Yeah. So it's up to them to define success. Of course we're available for career advice.
That's right.
Of course we give direction. Of course we make suggestions, sometimes stronger than others. But ultimately success needs to be defined by each one of them for their own lives and for their own dignity.
I see. So now let's talk about the greatest joy and the greatest frustration in your work. What are some of them?
Well, the greatest joy is easy and probably obvious. The greatest joy is seeing kids who, when I meet them, for the most part, have never had 3 meals a day to eat in their entire life. Kids who have been abused and, as we said, trafficked and lived an unimaginable, terrible lives. in a relatively short time, 18 months or 2 years, we know when your kid seems long, but at my stage, rather quick.
It goes on just like
to
that.
see the transition
Right.
and the lives and the possibilities for the future is not difficult to see just how rewarding and how rich and motivating an experience that is, how wonderful an experience that is for me and for others that work with me.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest frustration is not being able to do more of what we now know we can do well.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest frustration is only taking 20 kids every 9 months when with the model we have, we could be doing 100 kids.
Exactly.
That we could have a center in Sapa, having a significant impact in that community. That's the frustrating part, because I see of course we make lots of mistakes,
Right.
and we're learning all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we've learned a lot now, and the success of our kids speaks for itself. You don't need Neal anymore. Streets speaks for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly the kids speak for themselves. And it's frustrating to know that and to see it and experience it every day and not be able to do more, not be able to shake more people and more organizations and say, okay, we're on board, we'll help you in one way or another.
The training is never enough. This is why Dr. Neal Bermas is giving his students the opportunity to practice hands-on all the skills that they've learned in class. And that's why he's decided to open the Streets Restaurant Cafe on 17 Lê Lợi Street in Hoi An town. So let's check out what Streets has to offer.
Streets Restaurant Cafe. Coming here, trainees have the chance to work side by side with professionals and assume increasingly independent roles on their own. The restaurant is set up to run as a real business, as Neal believes it benefits the trainees more than a charity destination. Getting involved directly in a business can help trainees build their own careers faster in the future.
Our orientation to the training of these terribly poor and disadvantaged, vulnerable kids was to use a business model. If you ask some of the kids when I walk away, what about me, they'll tell you that I'm very difficult. They don't know that's become a joke now around here. Difficult means that we have high expectations for them, that our model comes really out of the business sector, that although of course we want to do the good thing, of course we're helping kids that had no other possibilities, we're doing it in a very rigorous and measured kind of way, much more similar to a business environment that you might find than to a not-for-profit environment.
After training and working for hours, the trainees return to their dormitory where they can spend time together, having fun and relaxing. Just months ago, these kids had to struggle for a living, and a life like this did not exist even in their wildest dreams. But now they are here, receiving an education that will eventually lead to a job. And at the same time, they can enjoy the atmosphere of a family that many of them have missed.
Tell us how the idea of the restaurant came about. Did it come about right at the beginning, or did it come about after you think that, okay, these students need a place to practice their skills?
No, it was from the very beginning.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, when I was kind of doing my research or homework, we might say, when I had the notion of doing this and I was traveling and I went and visited a lot of other places, I thought that the restaurants were good for the most part, but often people went there purely because they have street kid restaurants. I said from the very beginning, I say today, I don't want anybody coming to Streets because they feel sorry for us.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to come to Streets because the food is excellent and the service is superb.
Mm-hmm.
One, because as a restaurateur, I like all my restaurants to be there, to be like that. But most importantly, because you can imagine, how does that kid feel?
Right.
If they're working in a restaurant that is repeatedly one of the best rated, for instance, on TripAdvisor, or one of the most filled to capacity restaurants, one of the not lowest priced restaurants in Hoi An. Imagine how that feels to a young person, as we've talked about, who's just starting out, to be part of that. The sense of confidence,
Exactly.
the sense of dignity. So from the very beginning, I knew for sure I wanted to have a really top quality, excellent food restaurant for all those reasons.
And does working beside, people who are professionals at the restaurant help boost the students' confidence?
Yes, great question, sure. And again, our staff is all Vietnamese. So, and part of that reason, again, of course we always have an executive chef that we hire. And unlike some of the big hotels, I won't hire foreigners. We hire only Vietnamese executive chefs.
That's great.
And one of the main reasons, not the only reasons, but one of the main reasons again was as a role model. You see some American or somebody from France or Australia. It's not that they're not still a role model, but they look different. Let's just say they look different and they sound different. But if you see a Vietnamese person, you're a Vietnamese kid, they kind of look the same. And the language, although the dialect, depending where you're from, might be a little different, they kind of sound the same. So you can start to, you have nothing to say to you, oh, I can't do that. It's a good question, and it's an important point for how we've organized the restaurant.
Now, I've also heard that you've taken some of your students to go to the U.S. for them to give classes on Vietnamese food at culinary schools. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, this is a really nice story that we just came back from several months ago. We took two of our two graduates, to New York to teach how in New York City. Some might say, I don't want to be an arrogant New Yorker, the food capital of the world. I know that I say it, but certainly one of the big food towns. To teach at one of the best culinary schools in the U.S. how to cook bánh xèo, how to make cam ga.
Wow, chicken rice.
Chicken rice. How to make winter melon soup with shrimp.
Wow.
To a groups of 30 or 40.
And the audience are chefs, I assume.
Chefs in training.
Wow.
That's, as you put it, better than I could, that's wow. That was amazing. To see these kids standing in front in a beautiful studio kitchen, teaching.
In English as well, I assume, right?
Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
In English with smiles and joking and with confidence. Just an amazing, amazing experience.
Neal's choice to settle in Hoi An was not accidental. Having traveled in Southeast Asia for 10 years working for large hotel brands, he identified the town as a growing tourist destination. Neal fell for the city and its traditional way of life. In this tourist town, much of the local business community speaks English, and he received a warm welcome from the start. After 5 years in Hoi An, most of Neal's friends are now Vietnamese. He formed a particular close bond to Nguyễn Phước Hùng, his landlord at the street's restaurant. Hùng made sure that Neal was well prepared for the restaurant launch by picking an auspicious day for the event, and the friendship has grown and developed over time.
Khi mà đưa cho ông Neal là thuê nhà của mình xong á, thì mình thấy ổng thì rất là một người rất là kiểu như là rất hiền lành và có một lòng nhân ái, đó, giúp đỡ cho trẻ em đó, thì mình không làm được thì mình cũng để làm thăng ổng, để mình có một góp sức thêm vô, dù một góp sức nhỏ thôi, để cùng ổng giúp đỡ cho trẻ em.
Unlike big cities like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City, Hoi An does not have a big expat community, so Neal has to blend in with the locals. He makes regular visits to a simple coffee shop in the narrow streets of Hoi An. From the group of Vietnamese men playing Chinese chess to the locals having a chat, this basic simplicity helps bring life closer to Neal. He enjoys the contrast Hoi An brings compared with his old life in New York.
So you've been in Hoi An for about 4 years, and so how do you find the life in Hoi An?
It's great, and I'm always glad to get back to Hoi An. You know, Hoi An, although we can say, of course, it's touristy, and of course we have probably a few more tourist tailor shops than we necessarily need. But for me, it's still the real Vietnam. If you scratch just a little bit below the surface, it's still the real Vietnam. And if you get on a bicycle and you ride almost any direction for 20 minutes, you can be away from all the tourists. And I like that very much. I came here to know and be part of the Vietnamese community.
Right.
Hoi An has only about 100 expats. It's not like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City.
Right.
And I like that a lot. It's too comfortable, of course, if you're an expat or an English, especially an English-speaking expat, to start to hang out with expats.
That's right.
To eat with them and to socialize with them and to, on occasion, drink with them. By living in Hoi An with such a small expat community, we're forced to be in the Vietnamese community. All my neighbors are Vietnamese. A lot of them don't speak any English. I speak very little Vietnamese. But somehow we get to know one another.
Exactly.
And it's very, very special. I live down a little alley, down one of the back alleys in Hoi An, and we walk or bicycle everywhere. And the little kids know, the same little kids every morning want to practice, what's your name? What's your name? How are you? And it's sweet. It's very sweet. And the old ladies who are toasting banh can in the morning, and it's a very, very special place.
So what plans do you have to expand Streets International to other parts of Vietnam or other parts of Asia?
Well, as we said, Sapa.
Sapa.
Sapa for sure is on our list. So we start these discussions and we look for partners and we consider the possibilities as long as it's helping terribly, terribly poor kids in the way that we know how to help them. I'm open to expanding wherever we can, and we hope to certainly do that. My focus right now is continuing the work that we're doing in Vietnam and Sapa, and then possibly other places, depending on how all of that goes.
Right. All right, so thank you so much, Neal, for being on the show, Dr. Neal Bermas, and
Thank you.
I appreciate your time for being
Thank
here.
you. It's really been a pleasure.
Off the streets, into the kitchen. This is the motto that Dr. Neal Bermas is using to give street kids a future that might be free from poverty. So what can you do? How can you help? What is your motto? Visit streetsinternational.org. One more time, it's streetsinternational.org to learn more how you can help as well. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm Mai Phuong, and I hope to see you next time.